Thanks, Andrew. Good evening. Well, this week has shown us the best of humanity and the worst. The police officer, Amy Scott, who ran towards the danger, not waiting for a male partner or any police backup. The security guard, Mohammed Taha, who risked his life for a country he's not even a citizen of yet. The French national, Damien Gouraud, who, armed with just a bollard, single-handedly tried to stop the attacker from slashing families on yet another level of Westfield Shopping Centre. And the bishop, who was brutally and shockingly stabbed while delivering a sermon, but put out his hand to pray for his attacker just moments after, and now says he forgives him.
I forgive whoever has done this act. And I say to him, you're my son, I love you, and I will always pray for you. And whoever sent you to do this, I forgive them as well.
That was Bishop Murray Emmanuel speaking for the first time today. These are all true heroes, people who are just going about the mundanity of their daily lives. They never could have imagined the unexpected crisis they'd find themselves in, or that they'd later be declared warriors among men. It's amazing to think it's only been 5 days since the Bondi Junction horror. Peter Dutton today said the fact that women and children were targeted in that attack touched all of us, and he's right.
It's striking when you look among the flowers there and the bouquets and the beautiful messages to see the teddy bears that sit among the flowers, and obviously when you see an attack like this, it's repugnant enough that people are targeted, but in the case where women are targeted or children are the victims, there's a particular chord that strikes in the community.
Out of this tragedy, the generosity of Australians is also heartwarming. A GoFundMe page set up just a few days ago has now raised more than $620,000 for this little 9-month-old baby Harriet, who was stabbed and also lost her mum, Ash Good. The GoFundMe page says that Ash was a ray of sunshine and positivity in every aspect of her life and died a hero, saving her little girl from the most unspeakable evil. The family and friends who set up the page say, we have been overwhelmed by requests from loved ones and strangers wanting to support Dan and Harriet as they face life without their beloved Ash. Being a mother to baby Harriet and partner to Dan was Ash's whole life. Her love and commitment to them was evident to all who knew her. They say, we are united in our devastation that her bright future was cut short in this way. Her beautiful and warm spirit, drive and energy inspired us all. They said these funds are being collected for the benefit of Dan and Harriet to give them the freedom to go forward into the future without financial burden or worry. They say, we know that no amount of money will ever substitute her presence in their lives. Now, this $600,000 that's been raised is overwhelmingly made up of Australians donating as little as $5 each, whatever they can spare in this cost of living crisis. And what's even more beautiful, even more heartwarming, is reading the comments underneath. Serbi Barmecker wrote, my heart mourns for you, darling baby girl, sending you and the family so much love, and your mummy is always looking over you from above. Drew and Marianne Robinson wrote, Harriet, Mummy will continue to protect you forever as you will always feel her warm, loving arms around you as she watches you grow and guides you throughout life from heaven. Abby wrote, here's to Ashley. May we remember her not by her tragic end, but by her beautiful life and her final act of heroism. May her legacy be that of a mother who so loved her child that even in the face of death, she only concerned herself with getting her daughter to safety and thus saved her life. a beautiful soul that is never to be forgotten. And Samantha Mitchell wrote, I never knew you, Ash, but you have been in my thoughts every single day since this happened. I'm keeping your family in my prayers and sending love to that beautiful girl of yours. And there are so many more beautiful messages from right around the world. Now, if you want to donate even as little as $2, you can head to the GoFundMe page. The link's on the screen. And I know that her family and close friends are reading all of the beautiful messages. But how can a single event show us two sides of humanity? The heroes, the selfless among us, prepared to give up their own life to try save others more vulnerable. Those who have the courage, the strength to immediately, in that moment, instinctively, without even thinking, step up. These are shining stars. And then the flip side of the same coin, the sick and twisted man with a knife obsession who in a frenzy attacked women in the back, stabbing them when they never saw it coming, and incomprehensibly stabbed an innocent tiny baby in her pram, and also deprived her of her mother forever. And the alleged teenage terrorist who at 16 should know better, allegedly became captured by hate, now accused of stabbing a much-loved priest. And then the angry rioters who wore masks and took their fury out on the police, with multiple officers injured. One 19-year-old now charged over the incident. When New South Wales Premier Chris Minns brought religious community leaders together today with a message of peace and calm for all of us this weekend.
The message that's being sent from these community leaders is one of compassion, understanding, cohesion, unity, and most importantly, peace. Millions of people from New South Wales this weekend will go to churches and mosques, and they'll go to be amongst their community, to receive instruction and wisdom from leaders in their community, and to be with others of the same religion and faith. They'll go there for solace, for strength, to think about the future. And they need to do that in a spirit of peace and safety.
After a traumatic 5 days, let's hope our community comes together now and isn't further senselessly torn apart. Now, we're going to come back to that later on in the show. Also tonight, we're going to look at how Victorian police have slammed disruptive protesters as we discover officers have been pulled from at least 10,000 shifts to cover protests like the one you're seeing now. Maybe we should send the bill to these aggressive protesters. Plus, Mean Girl Katie Gallagher under fire over her claims there was a political cover-up in the Brittany Higgins case. This as calls for a corruption inquiry grow stronger. And could we be on the brink of World War III? Israel is on the verge of launching an attack on Iran in retaliation. The question now turning from not if, but when. Let's first now bring in tonight's panel, former Foreign Affairs and Defence Committee Chair Michael Danby and National Senator Matt Canavan. Michael and Matt, welcome to you both. Look, this has been an extremely difficult week for all of Australia, particularly for those in Sydney, particularly in the western suburbs and the eastern suburbs. Matt, you know, what's your reaction when you look at where this has left us, particularly the families of the 6 people who were killed just 5 days ago in Bondi Junction?
Well, it's an extraordinarily traumatic week for the people of Sydney, but all Australians to see this happen in what otherwise are really the most peaceful places of respite in our communities, our shopping centres, and in the case of out there at Fairfield in our religious sacred places. Look, I do want to think that there's hope for our country, though, because we have seen remarkable examples of bravery, courage, and forgiveness in the case of Bishop Murray Emanuel. I mean, amazing that just moments after he was attacked and stabbed, he was there praying over his assailant. and it's one of the most beautiful demonstrations of the Christian faith that I've seen for many times. So sometimes in the moments of the greatest darkness, there is also the moment of the greatest hope and light too. So I'm sure we will recover and rebound as a community from these terrible events, because it does show that most Australians help each other in these circumstances, and we will come together as a country following it.
Well, there are concerns of an unrest in Sydney's southwest and western communities this weekend. So Bishop Murray Emanuel's comments were even more important. Let's have a listen to some more of what he had to say today.
A piece of advice to our beloved faithfuls. I need you to act Christ-like. The Lord Jesus never taught us to fight. The Lord Jesus never taught us to retaliate. The Lord Jesus never said to us, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.
Michael Danby, the religious leaders all came together today with New South Wales Premier Chris Minns. They're really trying to encourage all of the different groups to just calm down. We know there have been death threats against mosques. We know that this terror attack has upset people so much that tensions are extremely high.
Minns is showing real leadership, as you've noted previously, and even people from the other side of politics have. I can understand how people in Sydney feel and around Australia. Things seem a bit unhinged since October the 7th. And I think partially leadership has got to encourage the police and the security agencies to see that this kind of stuff doesn't get out of hand. I'm sorry to say it, but I think the terrible scenes outside the Opera House, you can't say that it led to what happened in Bondi Junction, but give encouragement to other extremists that, they're off the hook. Now, if they're identifying Assyrians by taking their masks off and arresting them, why couldn't they have gone out to the western suburbs and unmasked those people who chanted those dreadful violence-inducing slogans? The police are too weak and too woke. Minns is showing leadership. I wish Albo and he were swapped. He might make a good Premier, Albo, and I think Minns would be a better national leader.
100%, 100%. Chris Minns would be there'd be a lot of people who'd be a much better Prime Minister than Anthony Albanese, let's be real. Look, let's have a look at Iran and Israel. All eyes are in Israel at the moment. We are expecting a retaliation strike against Iran imminently. Could be as soon as tonight, could be in the next couple of days. My sources tell me this is now a question of not if, but when. We've seen that world leaders just yesterday, foreign secretaries from the UK and from Germany went to Israel to try and give advice to Benjamin Netanyahu and Isaac Herzog on how they should retaliate. Here was David Cameron after visiting. Have a look.
But it's clear the Israelis are making a decision to act. We hope they do so in a way that does as little to escalate this as possible.
Matt, do you think... Well, I might actually start with you on this one, Michael, if you don't mind. Do you think Israel should attack Iran? And if so, what do you think the most effective targets would be for retaliation?
Poor old David Cameron used to be called the head of the Camel Corps, and his previous advice before he got to Israel reflected that. Look, I think the Israelis are very wise, prudent. I expect a little later than you suspect Sharri after Passover, so that's after Tuesday. And I think they will act on mainland Iran. They cannot spend another $1.9 billion as they did on Saturday night doing 10 or 20 of these Iranian attacks without response. And they have to be very measured and be careful of civilians. I expect the missile factories and the drone factories will suffer some kind of fate, and that Iranian spy ship off the coast of Eritrea, off the edge of the Persian Gulf, that's directing all of those Houthi proxy attacks, that might find itself at the bottom of the ocean.
No one would be disappointed if either of those targets were hit, especially because we suspect that the missile factories, or the weapons factories in Iran have been supplying weapons to Russia as well. Matt Canavan, we've seen that the US has called for restraint. They didn't even want Israel to strike back. But we have to remember that this isn't just a case of Iran launching those 350 attack drones and missiles on the weekend, but Iran reportedly greenlit the Hamas October 7 attacks. They fund Hezbollah, and they've been behind the Houthi rebels that have disrupted shipping. And that was all before the unprecedented direct attack on the weekend. Matt Canavan.
Well, look, I completely understand the desire for retaliation from the Israeli government. The attack that was made on them by Iran was reprehensible and does need a global response. But I am on the side of caution here. I used the example in the 1990s where Iraq bombed Israel during the first Gulf War, and the then Israeli leadership showed incredible restraint in not responding and not inflaming those tensions. And I think in hindsight, that was an extremely wise decision. I think we've got to be very careful here. I don't want the region here in the Middle East to descend into a wider war and certainly risk any greater collaboration. I mean, I think you've got to be very careful in these situations that if you're going to retaliate, if you try and do so in just a cautious way, it can just lead to a further downward spiral, because I agree with you, it would be fantastic, of course, to disarm Iran and disable their ability to attack other countries. But we also have to be realistic. Is that going to be an outcome from these attacks? If you're not going to disable and disarm them, all you possibly will do is can inflame tensions further and lead to more conflict around the world.
Michael Danby, very quickly before we move on to the next topic, what do you think about that? Is this a serious concern that this could lead to more regional escalation?
Matt's right. If they don't do the right thing, they have to be measured, prudent, accurate. And I think you'll find that their military and technology is far more formidable than Iran's. And there are all kinds of methods that they've got to achieve the aims that I suggested. Degrading the missile and drone factories would be especially good, even if they do it by cyber warfare. Our Ukrainian friends would be very grateful for that too, as their cities are being and civilians are being murdered by these dreadful Iranian drones every night.
All right, well, look, just on this topic, over in the US, Google has reportedly fired, this according to the New York Post, 28 of its employees across its New York and Californian offices after they protested the company's business ties with Israel. The pro-Palestinian protesters allegedly took over office spaces, defaced property, physically impeded the work of other staff. Matt, it's good to see a company not succumbing to this woke nonsense.
Let's hope it's a trend, hey? If you're going to act like this as an employee, you don't deserve to keep your job. We just hope that maybe the same example's used for other protests that might involve, say, climate change or other issues that many employees seem to think and take onto themselves that they get to decide what happens. Because I think the biggest threat to our Western democratic system is the rise of activist groups who feel that even if they're in a minority, they should get the right to disable, to stop traffic, to interrupt people going about their day. You have the right to protest in our countries, and that's always a right we should cherish. You do not have the right to disrupt other people going about their normal days while you do protest, and there should be ramifications for you if you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Now,
and Sharri, it's even worse than that. The Google National Childcare Officer has been tweeting about how the rapes in Israel are part of a Western colonialist mentality. I mean, that woman's got to go too. The real problem is, in so many of our institutions, these weird woke people have emerged from under their stones since this Hamas attack and sided with the rapists, murderers and kidnappers, not the victims. It's all over the world. It's not just an American or a Google or an Australian or a UK phenomenon. It's freakish. Why is it happening? We've got to stop it.
Look, it's going to get even more difficult for companies to hire top candidates who've come out of these Ivy League colleges in the US because we've seen the conduct on campus. I mean, you wouldn't want any of those people in your companies. Well, at least I wouldn't if I was a CEO. Matt Canavan, Michael Danby, so terrific to see both of you. Thank you very much for your time. Now, still to come, Katie Gallagher doing everything she can to avoid scrutiny over Brittany Higgins' multi-million-dollar payout as calls now grow louder for a corruption inquiry. Plus, Victorian police reveal they've been pulled off at least 10,000 regular duties to supervise disruptive protests. More on that after the break. Welcome back. Well, coming up in a moment, former Home Affairs boss Mike Pezzullo, who was sacked by the Albanese government, has broken his silence to a podcast. His warning about the risk of war before 2030. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But right now, let's bring in security expert and managing director of the Presidium Risk and Resilience Group, Scott Taylor. Scott, thank you very much for your time tonight. Look, Australians aren't used to dealing with incidents like we've seen this week. You know, places like New York and Israel are well known for their resilience. We just, luckily, are usually meant to be safe in this country. We should be prepared for anything. Do you think there needs to be different or extra security measures taken for places like shopping centres and churches to handle future potential attacks?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very sad situation that's occurring and quite tragic. But yeah, I definitely think it's time for us to have a fresh look at the next steps when it comes to some of the security measures. I think that's going to be quite across a couple of different areas as well. I mean, in essence, part of the physical, the electronic, but also the other things in regards to the equipment, the framework that we have with our frontline security personnel as well. I mean, things like the stab-proof vests, the additional items, some of these things to help enhance the security, their capability for them to be able to respond, but to keep them safe and well. So yeah, there's definitely needs to be some more conversations and some change occurring now.
There's also debate starting about whether the security guards in shopping centres do need to be armed. Do you have a view on this?
Yeah, I don't believe it's the right position for arming security guards from a firearm perspective. I think aside from potentially making them more targets, there's a whole range of other elements in there from the training compliance. I do firmly believe in regards to enhancing what they have, things such as the stab-proof vests, batons, and exploring the options in regards to either sprays or tasers, these sort of ranged type items. Because I think at the end of the day, the security are the first responders in a lot of these cases, aside from first aid, but also like from trying to help to step in and try and obtain and maintain control of a circumstance. So if there's anything that we can be doing to enhance their capability and the safety for doing those, then I think it's timely for us to do that.
Look, we've heard that there are concerns from authorities now about copycat attacks. So I hope this next question isn't just one from an anxious mother, but how would you best defend yourself from a knife attack as an individual?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about from the knife attack, and I suppose if you look at the situation with what occurred there at Wakeley, I mean, not that it even should have a name, but a grab and stab type attack, unfortunately, is very, very difficult to defend. And if you think about with what occurred at Bondi, in essence, somebody with those sort of actions, with people not having an awareness, is close to what you would call a civilian ambush. What needs to happen in that circumstance, really, the first point is always going to be from an awareness point of view, because if you're in that shopping centre, in those areas, they've got some great centralised communications. They're also changing the signing board, the light up boards, and as part of their emergency systems. But if we're walking around with two headphones in and out and looking down at devices, we won't pick some of these things up. So awareness has got to be one. From the knife attack circumstance, if that occurs, the thing is about for distance. So really it's about whatever you can first to try and get your hands up, cover yourself, and distance yourself in any way that you can, whatever's at your disposal, whatever you can to slow down, incapacitate, or put distance between you. And then obviously immediately be thinking from first aid. And it's a terrible circumstance to even have to think those things. But I think it all starts with not being fearful, but being more aware and alert when we're out.
So putting your hands up so that if there is a knife attack, it's further from your body. That's the idea.
Well, I mean, the other thing from your main organs for things in that as well. So putting up and with the back of your hands. So really, in other words, like you're using the back of your forearms. I mean, that's going to be a traditional defensive response anyway. But what you need to be thinking is from the distance point of view, trying whatever you can to distance, disengage, and then put items, objects, anything between yourself and the person committing the attack.
Yeah. All right, Scott Taylor, thank you very much for your time. And hopefully none of us will ever need that advice, but good to have it. Now, big news for defence this week. Labor announcing or re-announcing that it would boost defence spending. This time they've said that it's going to be boosted by $50 billion over the next decade. They've also said they're going to redirect $72 billion to pay for new submarines, ships and drones. It has been met with criticism. The Australian's foreign editor, Greg Sheridan, slamming Richard Marles, the Defence Minister, saying Marles is like an ageing carnival magician. He keeps performing the same four-card trick, hoping his audience never gets wise to the old-fashioned and obvious trickery. Let's bring in now defence expert, China expert and author Paul Monk. Paul, thank you very much for joining us. Do you agree with Greg Sheridan's assessment there?
Greg loves to write with a barb, and I think his high impact piece this morning would alert a lot of readers to the limitations in the way Richard Marles and the Albanese government have put out their statement. But it's notable that Cameron Stewart in the same newspaper at the same time said, the government's defence thinking is essentially on the right track. So it just goes to show that a lot depends on what angle you're looking at this from. What I would say is quite simply this, and this plays essentially to Greg's remarks, that what the government seems to be doing is very cautious, right? In circumstances where it is agreed that we've lost our margin of safety, a 10-year time horizon for threats, what they're saying is within 10 years we will have something respectable. Well, why would you adopt that perspective? Why wouldn't you say that we have to be ready, that this is something we have to be galvanised about as a community? We need to purchase things in short order that would enable us to play a role in collective security in this region in an emergency, which could come at any time. And that the government is not doing.
And that's the main concern, is that, the spending's welcome, but it's too far down the track and we need the defence systems in place now. Former Home Affairs boss Mike Pezzullo has made his first comment since he was sacked from the role. He's given an interview to a podcast by former News Corp journo Paul Maley, and he's lashed defence and both sides of government. This is Mike Pezzullo. He says Australia should have been prepared for the rising threat from China years ago. He said that history is going to judge Australia for failing to build more Collins-class submarines when we had the chance. Have a listen.
Defence should have been held accountable for this from mid-2009. That was 15 years ago. So has Australia dropped the ball? Have we lost a decade? Yes, at the very least a decade, arguably as much as 15 years.
Paul Monk, do you agree? Have we been too slow, or is this, all good and well to say in hindsight?
No, we have been slow, Sharri. I mean, those 15 years ago that Mike's referring to, I ran a series of seminars for the Submarine Institute, that is the professional submariners, on the question of what kind of submarine should Australia get. And at the point where I was launching that set of seminars, the 2IC and the submarine project attended, and he said, we might want to hire you to do this thing for us, to fund this properly. And then that didn't happen. And eventually I spoke to the Deputy Secretary of Defence, and he said to me, you need to understand that there is nobody involved in this decision who has any interest in transparency. In other words, there were special interests pushing and tugging and hauling in every direction. And that's why we didn't get a decision. We didn't get clarity. And I was simply an external consultant, and there was nothing I could do about that if they weren't going to let me in the door. So I completely agree with Mike. We did drop the ball on that. We ummed and we ahed, and we made one choice, then changed it, made another one, changed it, made another one. And then at the last minute, when the Virginia-class submarine became available under the AUKUS understanding, we said, oh, well, let's do that. But there's a long time horizon on that, and there are all sorts of collateral problems associated with it. So we do have a problem, but we also have the problem across the board, and what Greg Sheridan was saying today is, look, even if all we were going to do is get extra fighter aircraft, extra missiles, extra drones, surely we should be showing greater urgency than we're showing, given the state of world order.
Yeah, volatility in so many different areas. Look, just quickly, Paul Monk, before you go, the Australian's political editor, Simon Benson, has just broken a story up on the Oz website where he's also reporting that Mike Pezzullo gave a speech last week where he said there's actually, in his estimation, a 10% chance of conflict in our region before 2030. So clearly he would be referring to China here. You are a China expert. Do you think it could be this soon?
Oh, I'd have to say yes. And it's interesting when you put numbers on something. It's a degree of rigour to say I'm putting this number on my prediction. I'm not sure how he derived the 10%, but let me put it this way. There were many people in Europe, including Volodymyr Zelensky, who right up to the death knock did not believe. And I think I was speaking to you on the eve of the invasion and said I didn't believe that that Putin would be so foolish as to launch an all-out invasion. We were wrong, he did. And the CIA had anticipated that he would and told Macron, told Scholz, told Zelensky, this is what Putin's going to do. And they didn't believe him because they thought, surely he wouldn't do that. But he did. So what we have to take very seriously is that because we know that China is hazing Taiwan, bullying Japan, bullying South Korea, trying to coerce us, engaging in grey zone activities with Filipinos, at any tick of the clock, it could use force. And the calculus that will be behind that decision is in the hands of one man, Xi Jinping, because he's the absolute dictator in China at the moment.
Yeah. And he's most worried about his legacy, not our security or the regional security. Paul Monk, always great to have you on.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you very much for your time. Now, still to come, police officers in Victoria have been pulled from at least 10,000 shifts to respond to Palestinian and climate change protests. With all the disruption to traffic, shouldn't these protesters have to foot the bill? I'll talk about this with my panel after the break. Well, Victorian police are getting sick and tired of being deployed from their usual shifts to have to deal with the disruptive protests in Melbourne. The Herald Sun has revealed that officers were pulled from at least 10,000 shifts from their usual duties to respond to the average 21 protests that have been staged in the city each week. That seems like an enormous amount, and most of them, as we know, are climate change and pro-Palestinian protests. Let's bring in now Sky News host Danica DiGiorgio and commentator Jason Morrison. Great to see you both.
Likewise.
G'day.
Danica, this is frustrating for all of us, but for police officers, what a waste of resources when they could be better spent fighting crime.
Absolutely, complete waste of police resources. They're forced to pull out of at least 10,000 shifts. And in the meantime, Victoria's got a youth crime crisis, so they can't go and attend to the people that they need to attend to. It is a dangerous situation to be taking police off the beat, to be going and dealing with these hooligans who are driving people nuts. In the middle of peak hour traffic, these pro-Palestinian protesters the other day shut down protesters, shut down traffic. They're stopping cars, and quite frankly, they are an absolute pest and are turning people off their cause. And what bothers me the most, Sharri, is a lot of these people, they don't have a job, firstly. They've never worked 9 to 5, Monday to Friday in their entire lives. They go to bed, they wake up the next day, and they go to the next protest. We're sick to death of these people.
They go to the next protest unless it's raining. Then the issue doesn't matter as much if it's raining or on a weekend, because you don't want to ruin it.
I saw some footage today, and it must have been France, if I'm getting my accent or language accurate. Yeah. And there were people who were so fed up of waiting in a traffic jam. There was a big bloke, and he just got up and literally moved the protesters off the street.
That'll happen here.
Wish police would actually do that instead of what happens, which is that people just get stuck in a traffic jam in Australia.
There was a period and I'm unashamedly from New South Wales, and there was a period in New South Wales policing when police officers' intelligence was superior. They had better info, they had better tactics. They didn't worry about perceptions, they worried about the public order, and they worried about removing people who disrupted public order. Unfortunately, the media and the left of politics have got a lot to blame for this, because police are condemned for heavy-handed actions. Yet the public actually wants these people ripped off the streets and out of the way. If they had better intelligence, they'd get to the heart of the problem and deal with the ringleaders and charge them for the offences that they are committing. In many cases, unauthorised protests. In many cases, telling police they're going to be one place, getting a permit for it, and showing up in another. All of these things go on. They're common tactics. If you get down and shut down hard at the core of the problem, the rest will walk away. Yeah. I'm looking at the people on the screen here. They're easily led. And they're easily led by people who are pretty good at stirring them up.
And the other thing is some of these people are repeat offenders, and we know that that has been the case. And what they do is they get charged by police but then suddenly it's dropped by a magistrate, they're let off, and then they keep doing it. I mean, it's a cycle of reoffending with the same characters over and over.
Yeah. There's also this hypocrisy, though, from police. And you know, I unquestionably feel for police who are taken off their regular duties to have to every day go stand by a protest. But there is a hypocrisy that we've seen, at least in New South Wales, where no action taken on October 9, those Opera House protests, no arrests made, but then riots after the stabbing of the bishop on Monday night, and arrests are already happening. So it does seem to be a case of hands off the pro-Palestinian protesters. Now, let's have a look at mean girl Katie Gallagher. She's tried to distance herself from scrutiny over the Brittany Higgins controversial compensation payout. This is despite the fact that Katie Gallagher repeatedly grilled Linda Reynolds and the coalition on allegations over the scandal at the time. I revealed last year she'd misled the Senate. Now we know there was no political cover-up thanks to the verdict from Justice Michael Lee, but Katie Gallagher doesn't want to have anything to say. Have a look.
I'm not privy to it. I wasn't a decision maker in it. I had no role in it. But that agreement had been finalised between the Commonwealth and Ms Higgins in accordance with those rules.
Jason, do you think this payout should be examined by the Anti-Corruption Commission?
Yes. It was a politically charged decision in a politically charged case that started off as an allegation of sexual abuse or rape, as it's turned out to have been shown to be, and it was riddled with political claims. I mean, even today, James Willis in the Sydney Daily Telegraph reported emails that show Shiraz, the kingpin of the whole thing, basically boasting that he's got Katie Gallagher, on the hook on all of this, and she's in on it, and she'll do all the dirty work and whatever else. The emails and the texts are there. Now, even if they haven't got sufficient evidence from her, because she'll do the classic thing and have a vague memory about the whole thing, which she's already playing that game and not really answering the question, there's enough evidence from his dossier to be able to say, hang on, there was a game going on here. The whole country knows there's a game going on here, and it needs examination. And if this thing about corruption is going to be fair dinkum, its first possible examination should be around this case, because this is something that people whiff corruption with.
Yeah.
They won't get a cent back out of Brittany Higgins, by the way. They won't, because this is the ridiculousness of it. Even if they can show that there's been corruption in the political game here, it's not her fault. She just got the cash. She got good lawyers who got average politicians who negotiated an outcome that she wanted. So she won't have to pay it back. So the money's gone. It's gone.
It's a very complex story because there's no clear-cut villains and innocent parties here. I mean, clearly, according to the finding, Brittany Higgins was raped, extremely traumatic, according to the finding, and I'm sure every normal person would feel terribly for her that she went through that. But then, of course, the judge, Justice Michael Lee, was very critical of the narrative, as he called it, that she created with David Shiraz after they got together. And he did find that there were a lot of things that weren't true. I don't know what to call it, lies, but he did find that things she had said were not actually true.
Correct. He found that there were a series of mistruths, and you said there's no heroes and villains in this case, and you're spot on. Actually, everybody in this case is a loser. It is a curse. And it's anyone who has been touched by this have had their lives or their livelihoods disrupted or absolutely destroyed. And now we've got a situation where Labor has really been exposed for pushing a false narrative about claims of a political cover-up, which we now know to be completely false. Justice Lee on Monday completely debunked that theory. He said that there was no political cover-up. And the worst part about this is that Labor knew this. They knew the facts from the very beginning, and yet Labor and the leftist media kept pushing out this narrative, and it just spiralled out of control. It brought down the former coalition government. It played a big part in Scott Morrison's downfall. And if the National Anti-Corruption Body does not investigate this, then it's a complete waste of time, because there are too many questions that need answering.
Yeah, exactly.
And don't forget, it's important to remember, she didn't get the payout for the claimed rape. she got the payout for bullying in the office. That's a very different
for
thing.
the treatment by Michaela Cash and Linda Reynolds,
That's
and they
a
were
very different
excluded from the mediation process.
Yeah.
Now, prominent Muslim leaders have spoken out, highlighting that they believe there's this disparity between the treatment by authorities of the stabbing at Bondi Junction and the church attack. Now, last night on the program, this is when the claim was first made by Jamal Rifi. I had him on the show. But today we also saw the National Imams Council spokesman Bilal Rauf came out and said the same thing. He said there it was, very quickly said to be related to mental health. He's speaking about Bondi Junction. But here, where it is a 16-year-old boy, they said this must be religious terrorism. And here's what Jamal Rifi said last night.
But unfortunately, the overwhelming feeling in the community that it is, tales of two cities. You might consider that it is not a tale of two cities, but at least the feeling in southwestern Sydney is a tale of two different citizens.
Jason, the New South Wales Premier responded to this today. Chris Mincy came out very strongly and said, no, the one is terrorism because it was religiously motivated. It's not a judgment on which was more horrific.
Well, I'll meet them both at halfway. I think they're both acts of terrorism. And I thought it from day one with the information that was provided. He may not, the nutter at Bondi Junction, the mass murderer at Bondi Junction might not have been inspired by a religious thing, but he's been inspired by something to go around and target people at random in a peaceful place like a shopping centre. So, yep, that's terrorism. And so is what happened inside the Church of the Good Shepherd. And, the trouble is we dance around all the time and we look for clever definitions of things. They were both acts designed to terrify the crap out of people, and they did. And the response to both, there is a disparity. There's a disparity because there was peace and harmony in one corner of the city and there was a lynch mob in the other corner of the city. We got problems in that pocket of Sydney, and the problem starts with the blind commitment to multiculturalism, the blind commitment to the fact that we allow tribalisms to exist and we allow people not to live harmoniously in one culture. We allow them to live in little enclaves. And one enclave has allowed a little boy to grow up and to think it's okay to want to kill people who insult the religion and the prophet. And the other enclave thinks it's okay to want to lynch him for the crime he commits. We got a lot of problems because you live in a harmonious society when you are under one rule of law, and we don't have it. And the Imams Society, or whatever the name is, can try to look for a clever political score on this one by saying, oh, it's so different in the way it's done. No, guys, not at all. You have a religion that is radical fringe, encourages people to kill those who insult. And I'm sorry, that is not compatible with a civilised society. And you can dress it up how you like and you can continue to kid yourself, but you are not going to fit into a civilised, harmonic society if you think this is a way to live your life.
And there are hate preachers who preach that radical view, but the reporting this week in the Daily Telegraph and in the Australian has been that the mainstream Islamic centres had kicked out this teenager allegedly because of his hardline views. So his views didn't align with mainstream Muslim values and beliefs. So there was a problem there, according to the reports in the Australian.
Yeah.
And just the only other thing I'd say is that I agree. The Saturday evening attack did terrify the community. It has caused anxiety, but of course there are technical definitions where they say that terrorism is if it's politically or ideologically motivated. But we are out of time.
My kids are scared shitless about going into shopping centres because of what happened there at Bondi. That's terrorism.
Jason Morrison, Danica DiGiorgio, thank you very much for your time. Now, after the break, Israel's retaliation against Iran is imminent as the world gives advice on how it should respond. Senator James Paterson will join me next. We're also going to look at TikTok. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Well, let's bring in now Shadow Home Affairs Minister James Paterson. James, great to have you on. Look, Israel is being urged by the US not to attack Iran, although Joe Biden has written a piece in the Wall Street Journal where he pledges commitment to continue supporting Israel. What do you think? Should Israel be retaliating against Iran?
Sharri, of course, no one wants a wider war in the Middle East, but let's just take a step back and think about what Iran did last weekend. In any other time, in any other context, we would all regard that as an overt declaration of war, because one country from its sovereign territory launched 300 drones and missiles to the sovereign territory of another country with the intent to cause harm. And it was only thanks to advanced Israeli technology and their partners that they were able to stop most of those, but otherwise it would have wreaked very serious harm against the state of Israel. Now, if that happened to Australia, if someone did that to us, we would regard that as a declaration of war and would expect our government to respond accordingly. And the reason why Iran's got away with this is because everyone's so used to Iran waging war on Israel through its proxies, through Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis and others. But really a very important threshold has been crossed. It's very clear that deterrence has broken down in the Middle East, and it's my expectation that Israel will want to reassert that deterrence by demonstrating to Iran that there's a very real cost for this behaviour, that they can't get away with this very serious escalation of violence.
Well, part of that deterrence that you say has broken down in the Middle East, and I agree with you, is because the US has been criticising Israel so much. Have a listen to Joe Biden's half-hearted warning to Tehran.
My message to any state or any other hostile actor thinking about attacking Israel remains the same as it was a week ago. Don't.
Mr. President, to Iran in this moment.
Don't.
It's like he can't get out a longer sentence. James Patterson, obviously I don't expect you to be critical about the US president, but do you think the US could have been stronger in its support for Israel in recent months?
Well, Iran's done something that it's never done before. It has never so overtly launched an attack on Israel. We all know that Iran is devoted to the destruction of Israel. We all know that it funds proxies in the region to harm Israel. We all know it wants to see the Jewish state wiped off the map. But it's never crossed this threshold before. It didn't even cross this threshold so directly with the killing of Soleimani under the Trump administration, of a senior IRGC commander. Yes, they responded to US bases in the region, but they didn't strike the American mainland, obviously, and they've never before struck Israel like this. And so I understand why many Israelis feel, and I suspect the government feels, that Iran has to pay a price for this and that it too will strike back in return and in similar terms to the way in which Iran struck them. I'm sure it'll be a carefully calibrated response because Israel doesn't want to fight on too many more fronts as well, but it wants Iran to understand that there are consequences for this behaviour and that if no one else will enforce those consequences, then Israel will.
You're right. Just on TikTok, you've referred TikTok and its parent company to AUSTRAC, the financial crimes regulator, after reports that they violated anti-money laundering and counter-terror financing laws. What's this over?
It's a slightly complicated story, Sharri, but the simple answer is TikTok lied again to regulators about being busted for violating anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing laws. That's a very serious charge. It's no wonder the US Congress looks like they're about to vote through a really strong bill that's going to make TikTok safe for Americans by getting the Chinese Communist Party's influence out of it, and we need to do the same.
All right. James Patterson, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. Look, it's been a very heavy week. We've dealt with it all here together on this program and on Sky News more generally. I'm actually going to be off on Monday and Tuesday evenings for Passover. And I just wanted to have this final thought on Passover, the Jewish holiday. It seems that the theme of "Let my people go" rings true once again today, with more than 130 hostages still being held by Hamas in Gaza. 130 hostages, including babies and children. The world seems to be forgetting them every day when there's this constant call for a ceasefire. Well, we can't have a ceasefire until these families, including babies and children, are brought home safely, until Hamas is destroyed. So I'll see you on Wednesday at 8 o'clock. I hope everyone has a safe weekend. Let's pray there's peace, better than last weekend. And right now, here's Paul Murray.